The moment Ethan Thorne's hand shot out, grabbing the collar of Zoe Clark's shirt and yanking her up from the bench, the roar of the Northwood High cafeteria collapsed into a vacuum of dead silence. 300 students, mid-chew, mid-gossip, mid-laugh, froze in place, a sprawling tableau of suspended animation, as if a switch had been flipped on the soundtrack of their lives. But Zoe Clark didn't gasp. She didn't struggle. Her eyes, dark and steady, didn't even widen in surprise. What happened in the next 3 seconds would not just define her time at Northwood High. It would shatter the school's social order forever. The leather of the passenger seat felt slick and cool against Zoe Clark's back, a stark contrast to the humid Atlanta air she was used to. Her mother's hands were tight on the steering wheel, her knuckles white. "Just keep your head down for a little while, baby," she said, her voice a low, familiar hum of concern. "Let them get used to you." Zoe nodded, a silent promise she knew she couldn't keep. Keeping her head down wasn't in her DNA. She looked out at Northwood High, a sprawling brick monolith that seemed to absorb the morning light without reflecting any of it back. It looked less like a school and more like a fortress. The moment she stepped inside, the sensory assault began. The air was thick with the sterile, citrusy smell of industrial floor polish, a thin veneer over the deeper, more pervasive scent of teenage apathy and reheated pizza. The jarring shriek of the bell echoed in the cavernous hallways, making her flinch. It wasn't the warm, chaotic buzz of her old school. It was a command. First period was English with Ms. Alvarez. The fluorescent lights above hummed a low, incessant tune that made Zoe's skin feel itchy and tight. She found an empty seat and tried to make herself small as Ms. Alvarez beamed at the class. "Class, we have a new student joining us from Atlanta. Please give a warm Northwood welcome to Zoe Clark." Zoe felt the shift in the room, the subtle atmospheric pressure change as 300 pairs of eyes turned to her. She scanned their faces, a rapid-fire categorization she'd learned from years of being the new girl, the different girl. She saw mild curiosity, a vast sea of indifference, and from the back corner, something else. Something cold and appraising. He was sprawled in a chair as if it were a throne, one long leg stretched into the aisle. He wasn't just occupying the space. He was conquering it. An expensive, minimalist watch with a silent, sweeping second hand adorned his wrist. This was Ethan Thorne, star quarterback, son of the council president, a local dynasty packed into a Letterman jacket. His family name was etched onto the town library, the park, the football field. He was a prince in his inherited kingdom. He leaned toward his friend, a lanky boy named Kyle, and muttered, his voice a stage whisper designed to carry. "Look what the admissions office dragged in." Kyle snickered. The sound was wet and sycophantic. Ms. Alvarez's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She shot a warning look toward the back, but it was a glance without substance, a warning without a threat. Teachers at Northwood High didn't challenge Ethan Thorne. Zoe took the only empty seat, 3 rows ahead of him. She could feel his eyes on the back of her neck, a physical weight. It wasn't just a look, it was a broadcast of hostility, a territorial signal. She'd felt it before in other schools, other classrooms. The difference was this time she was tired. Tired of smiling, tired of pretending she didn't hear, tired of absorbing the casual cruelty. This time, she was ready. The first real incident happened 2 days later in chemistry lab. The sharp, acrid scent of formaldehyde hung in the air. Zoe was paired with a quiet, observant girl named Lynn, whose relief at having a partner who actually wanted to do the work was palpable. They were measuring hydrochloric acid, the clear liquid looking deceptively like water in its glass beaker. Ethan and his crew sauntered by their station, a swaggering pack moving through their domain. Ethan's shoulder didn't just brush against Zoe's arm. It slammed into it. Hard. The beaker tipped, and a splash of acid sizzled across their lab manual, the paper browning and curling as if touched by a phantom flame. The sound was small, but in the relative quiet of the lab, it was as loud as a gunshot. "Oops," Ethan said, his voice dripping with faux sincerity. "Maybe you should go back to where you came from if you can't handle basic equipment." Snickers rippled through his friends. Half the class saw. The teacher, Mr. Pole's son, was on the other side of the room, his back turned. Nobody said a word. Zoe looked up from the ruined manual, her dark eyes steady. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. You should watch where you're going, she said, her tone level and cool. Might hurt yourself being that clumsy. Ethan's smirk vanished, replaced by a flush of red that crept up his neck. Excuse me? You heard me, Zoe said, turning back to the experiment as if he were a minor distraction. Or do you need me to speak slower? The room went dead quiet. Students froze, pipettes hovering over beakers. Nobody talked to Ethan Thorne like that. Nobody. Kyle and the others exchanged wide-eyed looks, waiting for the explosion. But the bell shrieked its jarring command, saving everyone. As students scrambled to pack up, Ethan leaned in close to Zoe, his voice a low growl. You just made a big mistake, new girl. Zoe didn't flinch. She met his gaze without blinking. I don't make mistakes, she said softly. I make choices. Over the next 2 weeks, Ethan's campaign began. It was a war of 1,000 paper cuts. She opened her locker to find it crammed with trash. Not just crumpled paper, but the sticky, half-empty cartons of chocolate milk and greasy fast food wrappers from the cafeteria. The violation felt deeply personal. One afternoon, her backpack vanished during gym, only to be found later, dumped unceremoniously in the boys' bathroom next to a urinal. Then came the notes. Anonymous slips of paper left on her desk. Go back to the ghetto. You don't belong here. One was a crude drawing of her, with exaggerated features, a caricature of hate. The whispers followed her down the hallways, a constant, venomous soundtrack. They'd comment on her hair, her clothes, the way she spoke. In the crowded corridors, Ethan's friends would form impenetrable walls, forcing her to push through, their shoulders hard and unyielding. Her mother noticed the tension. How's school, baby? She asked over dinner, her eyes, so adept at spotting the slightest change in a patient's vital signs, missing nothing. It's fine, Mama, Zoe said, pushing peas around her plate. Her mother, a nurse who worked double shifts to afford the rent on their small apartment in this supposedly better school district, wasn't fooled. Zoe Clark. I didn't raise a liar. What's happening? Zoe wanted to tell her everything, but she knew the script. Her mother would call the school righteous and furious. The school would make placating noises, and things would get worse. They always got worse when parents got involved. So she forced a smile. Just typical new kid stuff. I'm handling it. Handling it was becoming a full-time job. Late one night, after a particularly grueling day of silent treatments and snide remarks, Zoe went to the garage. The air was cool and smelled of gasoline and leather. She pulled on her worn boxing gloves and faced the heavy bag that hung from a thick steel beam. Thump, 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 thud. The rhythmic impact was a release of prayer. Her father's voice, a calm anchor in her memory, echoed in her head. He was a former Air Force pararescueman, a man who had jumped out of helicopters into the world's most dangerous places to save people. He had taught her more than just fighting. He had taught her control. Don't get emotional, his voice instructed. Emotion makes you sloppy. See the openings, control the space, neutralize the threat. Thump, thump. The bag swayed. She pictured Ethan's smirking face. Violence is the last option, Zoe. Always. But when someone puts their hands on you, when walking away isn't possible, you end it. Quick and decisive. No playing around. After her workout, sweat dripping from her brow, she sat at her desk. She pulled out a small, black, hardcover notebook. She opened it and began to write, her pen moving with methodical precision. October 14th. Locker filled with trash and discarded food. Took photo at 3:15 p.m. October 16th. Note left on desk in history. See photo number 8. She taped the hateful notes to the pages, creating a meticulous log of cruelty. She wasn't just a victim. She was a strategist, gathering intelligence for a war she hoped she would never have to fight. It was a Friday afternoon in the library, the air thick with the scent of old paper and dust motes dancing in the slanted sunlight. Zoe was trying to lose herself in a history textbook when a shadow fell over her. It was Lynn. She was wringing her hands, her eyes wide with fear. "Zoe," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You have to be careful." Zoe looked up, her internal alarm system on high alert. "Ling, what's wrong?" "I heard Ethan and Kyle in the gym," she said, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "They were talking about you. Ethan's furious that you're not scared of him. He said he's going to put you in your place for good. He's planning something. Something big." A cold knot formed in Zoe's stomach. She closed her textbook. The simmering tension was about to boil over. The Monday of the third week arrived gray and damp, the sky the color of unpolished steel. Zoe walked into Northwood High wearing ripped jeans and a faded t-shirt from her favorite Atlanta bookstore, a small act of defiance, a reminder of a place where she belonged. She felt the familiar weight of stairs in the hallway, heard the whispers that coiled and struck like snakes in the grass. But she kept her head high, her shoulders back, just as her father had taught her. The gathering storm Lynn had warned her about was all she could think about. During the morning break, she went to her locker to grab her history book. Her combination lock felt cool and solid in her hand. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for whatever petty vandalism she might find inside. But it wasn't trash this time. When she swung the metal door open, a cascade of glossy photo prints spilled out, scattering across the floor at her feet. They were heavy, high-quality prints, the kind you get from a photo lab. Zoe bent down and picked one up. Her breath caught in her throat. It was a black-and-white historical photograph of civil rights protesters being blasted with fire hoses, their bodies contorted in pain. But one of the faces in the crowd, twisted in an expression of agony, had been replaced with hers. Her hands began to tremble. She picked up another, a famous image of a lunch counter sit-in, protesters covered in food and spit by a jeering mob. And there, on the stoic face of a young woman, was her own, crudely photoshopped. Another. Pictures of lynchings, of marches broken by police dogs, of suffering and degradation. And on every victim, her face. This was beyond harassment. This was not a schoolyard prank. This was a hate crime, a carefully curated gallery of torment designed to shatter her soul. The cold knot in her stomach didn't dissolve into fear. It hardened, then ignited. A white-hot rage, pure and clean, burned away every shred of her practiced calm, every ounce of her desire to just get by. This was the line. They had crossed the line. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. With deliberate, almost robotic movements, she gathered every single photo. She didn't leave one behind. Holding the sick collection in her hands, she walked straight to the principal's office. Dr. Evans, a woman who always seemed overwhelmed by the simple act of existing, looked up from her desk, her face a mask of weary professionalism. "Yes, Miss Clark. Can I help you?" Zoe didn't say a word. She walked to the polished mahogany desk and laid the photos out, one by one, creating a mosaic of hatred. Dr. Evans's face paled. She picked one up, her fingers trembling slightly, and dropped it as if it were hot. This is horrific," she stammered, her gaze skittering around the room, landing on everything but Zoe's eyes. "Do you have any idea who did this?" Zoe finally met her gaze, her own eyes like chips of obsidian. "We both know who's behind this, Dr. Evans. The question is, are you going to do something about it, or do I need to handle this myself?" The principal shifted in her ergonomic chair, the leather groaning in protest. "Without concrete proof linking this to a specific student, Miss Clark, our hands are tied. It's his word against, well, an anonymous act. I can file a report. We can increase hall monitoring." The bureaucratic jargon, the limp excuses, were like gasoline on the fire in Zoe's chest. She stood up, her movements sharp and precise, and began gathering the photos. "Save your reports." Her voice was dangerously quiet. "I've got all the documentation I need. Miss Clark, please, don't do anything rash," Dr. Evans called after her as she walked out. "We have procedures for this." But Zoe was already gone. Her mind was made up. The system wouldn't protect her. The procedures were designed to protect the system itself. She would have to protect herself. Lunchtime arrived with its usual roaring chaos. The cafeteria smelled of stale grease and disinfectant. Every table seemed to mysteriously become full the moment she approached with her tray. Finally, she found a spot at the far end of a half-empty table, a small island in a sea of noise. She just wanted to eat her sandwich in peace. She was halfway through it when a shadow fell over her. Ethan Thorne. He wasn't alone. Kyle and two other hulking football players flanked him, a royal guard for the king of Northwood High. The cafeteria noise didn't just quiet down, it died. The ambient roar collapsed into a vacuum of dead silence. 300 students, mid-bite, mid-laugh, froze. And in the silence, a new sound emerged. The soft, electronic whir of dozens of phones being raised, their small red recording lights winking on like malevolent eyes in the sudden stillness. "Hey, new girl," Ethan said, his voice carrying across the room, full of smug authority. "You're in my seat." Zoe didn't look up from her food. "Funny," she said, taking a deliberate bite of her sandwich. "I don't see your name on it." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Everything in this school has my name on it, including that seat. So move." Zoe finished chewing, swallowed slowly, and finally looked up, her expression one of profound boredom. "No." The word, so small, so simple, hung in the air like a declaration of war. A student at a nearby table actually gasped. Ethan's face went from smug to crimson in a heartbeat. He took a step closer, looming over her. "I said, move. Now." Zoe met his furious gaze with a calm that seemed to infuriate him even more. "And I said no. You should learn to accept it." That's when he snapped. His hand shot out, faster than she expected, and wrapped around the collar of her shirt. He yanked her backward, up from the bench. Her tray clattered to the floor, scattering apple slices and potato chips across the linoleum. "Listen here," he snarled, his face inches from hers. His breath was hot and sour. "You don't belong here. You never will. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows it." His grip tightened, lifting her slightly off her feet. The cafeteria was a tomb. 300 spectators, a silent, watching jury. This was it. The moment she had been preparing for, not just for 3 weeks, but for years. Every grueling training session, every drop of sweat, every lesson her father had drilled into her muscle memory, it all came down to this. Time seemed to slow, stretching like warm taffy. Her father's voice echoed in the sudden, vast silence of her mind. When someone puts their hands on you, it's over. No playing, no showing off. End it. She saw everything with a preternatural clarity. Ethan's hand on her collar, his sneering face, the circle of his friends, ready to jump in. And she saw his mistakes. He was too close. His emotions had made him sloppy. His weight was too far forward on his front foot, a classic error. His other hand was down at his side, useless. His friends were too far away to help him in the next 2 seconds. And 2 seconds was all she needed. Zoe's hand came up, a blur of motion. She didn't hit him. She grabbed his wrist, the one holding her collar, her fingers finding the precise pressure points. She twisted it sharply clockwise. At the exact same instant, she pivoted to the side and brought her right knee up, hard, into the soft vulnerability of his solar plexus. Whoosh! The air rushed out of him in a pained gasp. His grip on her collar loosened instantly. Before he could even process the pain, Zoe continued the wrist lock, using his own forward momentum against him, forcing him to bend at the waist. Then, with a fluid, economical motion, she swept his front leg with her foot. Ethan Thorne, star quarterback, council president's son, the untouchable king of Northwood High, hit the cafeteria floor. The sound was not a thump. It was a boom, a wet, heavy impact that echoed through the silent room like a thunderclap, the sound of a falling monument. But she wasn't done. As he gasped on the floor, trying to get up, she maintained control of his wrist, planted the sole of her sneaker squarely in the center of his chest, and applied just enough pressure to keep him down without causing serious injury. It was a move of pure control, not punishment. "Stay down," she said. Her voice was calm, clear, and carried through the stunned silence. "It's over." Ethan's face was a mottled canvas of purple rage and absolute humiliation. His friends, Kyle and the others, finally shook off their shock and started to move forward. Zoe's eyes snapped to them, hard and cold as diamonds. Anyone else want to put their hands on me? They froze. This wasn't how the story was supposed to go. That's assault. Ethan wheezed from the floor. You attacked me. Everyone saw. Zoe almost smiled. It was a cold, sharp expression that didn't touch her eyes. Everyone saw you grab me first, she corrected him. I defended myself. There's a big difference. The arrival of the security guards was like a dam breaking. The stunned silence of the cafeteria erupted into a roaring chaos of voices. Students were shouting, pointing, and replaying the videos on their phones, the small screens glowing like embers in the dim light. What happened here? The older guard, Officer Martinez, asked, his gaze flicking between Zoe, calm and still, and Ethan, who was now scrambling to his feet, his face a mask of incandescent fury. She attacked me, Ethan yelled, his voice cracking with humiliation. This psycho just attacked me for no reason. Before Zoe could even form a response, voices erupted from the crowd. That's a lie, a boy from the chess club shouted. He grabbed her first. I saw it. He lifted her off her feet, another student added. And then, Lynn's voice cut through the noise, clear and unwavering. She brandished her phone as if it were a legal document. I recorded the whole thing. He assaulted her. She just defended herself. More phones appeared, a constellation of digital witnesses. More videos, all showing the same undeniable sequence. Ethan's aggression, his hand grabbing Zoe's collar, his threatening snarl, and then her swift, efficient, and controlled response. Officer Martinez watched one of the videos, his expression shifting from confusion to grim understanding. He looked at Ethan. Looks like you've got some explaining to do, young man. But my father, Ethan began, falling back on the one defense that had always worked. Your father doesn't run this school. A sharp voice cut in. Dr. Evans, the principal, had arrived, flanked by more security. She looked shaken, but for the first time since Zoe had met her, she also looked determined. The undeniable video evidence had given her a spine. I've had enough, she said, her voice ringing with newfound authority. Mr. Thorne, you're coming with me. We're calling your parents, and we're calling the police. This is assault, and there will be consequences. As security escorted a still protesting Ethan away, his threats of lawsuits and retribution fading down the hallway, Zoe felt a light touch on her shoulder. She turned to see Ms. Alvarez, her English teacher. Are you okay? The teacher asked softly, her eyes full of a sad, self-reproachful light. Zoe nodded. I'm fine. Better, actually. Ms. Alvarez's lips curved into a pained smile. I'm sorry, she said, her voice thick with regret. I should have done something sooner. We all should have. The rest of the day was a blur. Zoe was called to the office to give a formal statement. Her mother arrived within the hour, her face a storm of fear and pride, still in the light blue scrubs she wore at the hospital. When she heard the full story and saw the video, she didn't scold Zoe. She pulled her into a fierce, bone-crushing hug. I'm so proud of you, baby, she whispered in her hair. So proud. And so terrified. Are you sure you're okay? By evening, the video had escaped the confines of Northwood High. With a title that read, Northwood High Bully Gets Flipped, it was rocketing through social media. The view count climbed exponentially. 10,000, 50,000, 500,000. Zoe's phone buzzed incessantly, a frantic, angry insect in her pocket. She scrolled through the comments, a dizzying mix of cheering support. Why, yes, Queen. He got what he deserved. Earnest debate about self-defense, and a predictable sewer of ugly, racist trolling. She quickly shut it off. Parents were flooding the school's phone lines, demanding to know how harassment had been allowed to escalate to physical assault. The school board called an emergency meeting. Ethan's father, the mighty Richard Thorne, arrived at the school in his gleaming black Mercedes, his face a thundercloud of arrogant fury. But for once, his money and influence couldn't make the problem disappear. There were too many witnesses, too much evidence, too much public attention. Ethan was suspended immediately, pending a full investigation. Criminal charges were being considered. The next morning, The parking lot of Northwood High looked like a media command center. News vans from local and even national affiliates were camped out, their satellite dishes pointed at the sky. Someone had leaked the photoshopped hate images, and the story had exploded. It was no longer just a fight. The narrative was now about racial harassment, physical assault, and administrative negligence. It was all coming out. Zoe kept her head down as she walked through the gauntlet of cameras and shouting reporters, shielded by her parents. She wasn't interested in being anyone's symbol or spokesperson. She just wanted to go to class. But peace wasn't on the schedule. The atmosphere inside the school was charged, polarized. The student body had split into factions. In the hallways, some students gave her quiet nods of respect, their eyes conveying a gratitude she found deeply unsettling. Others glared with open hostility, muttering about reverse racism as she passed. In her first period English class, someone had scrawled "hero" in big block letters on her desk. In second period math, someone else had etched a racial slur into the back of her calculator. The battle lines were drawn. At lunch, Lynn found her practically vibrating with nervous energy. "You're famous," she said, her eyes wide. "Everyone's talking about you. That video has like 5 million views already." "I didn't want to be famous," Zoe said, pushing food around her tray, her appetite gone. "I just wanted to be left alone." "But that's the thing," Lynn said, her voice suddenly serious. "They never leave us alone. My family's been here for 20 years, and people still treat us like we're guests. At least you fought back. At least you showed them we won't just take it anymore." Before Zoe could respond, a figure appeared at their table. It was Kyle. Both girls tensed, but he held his hands up in a gesture of peace. He looked pale, and his eyes were red-rimmed. I just wanted to say I'm sorry," he stammered, refusing to meet Zoe's gaze. "For everything. What Ethan did, what we all let him do, it was wrong." Zoe studied his face, searching for deception. "Why now? Why apologize after I embarrassed your friend?" Kyle shifted uncomfortably, finally looking at her. His shame seemed genuine. Because seeing him on that floor, he looked small, he said, the words tumbling out. "He's not a leader. He's just a bully. A real friend doesn't make you do terrible things to other people just to feel big. I should have said something weeks ago. I'm sorry I didn't." He turned and walked away before either girl could respond, leaving them in a stunned silence. It was the first tiny crack in the monolithic power structure of Northwood High. The cracks kept spreading. News circulated that 3 other students, a sophomore who had been extorted for money and 2 girls who had been victims of Ethan's relentless verbal abuse, had come forward to give statements to the administration. Emboldened by Zoe's stand, the silence was breaking. That afternoon, the principal's resignation was announced over the school intercom, a terse, pre-written statement admitting she had failed in her duty to protect all students equally. On Friday, Zoe was called to the office again. She expected another meeting with lawyers, but instead, she found her father waiting for her. He'd driven all night from his base after getting time off. His eyes, usually so calm and controlled, were filled with a fierce, unwavering pride. He pulled her into a hug. "You did good, baby girl," he said, his voice rumbling in her ear. "Used your training just like I taught you. Minimum force necessary. Controlled response. I'm proud of you." They sat in a small conference room, and his expression grew serious. "But this changes things," he said, his voice low. "That boy's family has power. Money. They're going to come after us any way they can. Legally. Socially. Are you prepared for that?" Zoe met his eyes, her mother's determination and her father's strength forged together in her gaze. "I've been preparing my whole life, Dad," she said. "I'm not backing down now." The meeting that followed included the new interim principal, the school district's lawyer, and a sharp, composed woman from a national civil rights organization who had reached out to offer support. They discussed safety measures, legal protections, and the ongoing investigation. It was overwhelming. But as they spoke, Zoe felt something she hadn't expected. Hope. People were finally listening. The system was finally, grudgingly, starting to move. The fight was no longer just hers. The weeks that followed were a crucible, The Thorne family, true to her father's prediction, came after them. They hired a high-powered PR firm to spin the story, painting Ethan as the victim of a calculated, violent attack by an unstable transfer student. They threatened to sue the school, the district, and Zoe's family. But the videos were clear, the documentation of harassment was meticulous, and the chorus of other victims was growing louder. For the first time, the Thorne family's power was failing them. Ethan was expelled and faced juvenile assault charges. The school itself began a slow, painful metamorphosis. Some of the changes were clumsy and performative. Shiny new zero tolerance for hate, banners hung in hallways where bullying had been a spectator sport just weeks before. But other changes were genuine. Ms. Alvarez, looking revitalized, scrapped her planned curriculum and started a new unit called Voices of Resistance, having students read James Baldwin and Audre Lorde. A new principal was hired, Dr. Ramirez, a woman with a formidable reputation for equity and inclusion, who began her tenure by holding open listening sessions for any student who wanted to share their experience. Zoe found herself, reluctantly, at the center of this transformation. She was invited to speak to the student council, to join a newly formed diversity and safety committee. She hated the spotlight, the weight of expectation. She hadn't asked to be a revolutionary, but she also understood that she couldn't walk away. She had a responsibility to the students who now looked at her with hope in their eyes. She started a small, informal self-defense club that met twice a week in the old gym. Lynn was her first student. Zoe taught them what her father had taught her: awareness, de-escalation, and control. It wasn't about winning fights. It was about earning the right to walk away from them. The Thorne family's last-ditch effort was a civil suit against Zoe for assault and emotional distress. The day in court was tense, but brief. The judge watched the cafeteria video 3 times in silent succession. He looked at Ethan, then at Zoe, and threw the case out. "Self-defense is not assault, counsel," he stated, his voice ringing with finality. "And your client might consider himself fortunate that Miss Clark showed such remarkable restraint." It was a public legal vindication that echoed through the town. Months later, on a quiet Tuesday night, Zoe's phone rang with an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but some instinct made her pick up. "Zoe, it's Ethan. Please don't hang up." The voice was unrecognizable. The arrogant, entitled tone was gone, replaced by something hesitant and thin. She stayed silent, waiting. I'm calling to apologize," he continued, the words sounding foreign and difficult in his mouth. "I've been in therapy, anger management, the whole thing, and I realized I was wrong about everything. The way I treated you was inexcusable. I don't expect you to forgive me. I wanted you to know that I'm sorry, and I'm trying to be better." The call was short. Zoe's response was mature, measured. "I appreciate the call, Ethan," she said honestly. "But you should know that words don't erase what happened. Real change is about what you do next. I hope you figure that out." She felt a strange sense of closure, not of forgiveness, but of an ending. He was no longer her monster to fight. He was just a boy with his own demons. Her senior year, she saw proof that the change was real. A freshman girl, a Muslim student named Samira, approached her after a self-defense session, her eyes wide with fear. "They pull at my hijab," she whispered. "They tell me to go back where I came from. I'm scared to come to school." Zoe felt the old, familiar fire ignite in her chest. But this time, she didn't have to fight the battle alone. She knelt to meet Samira's eyes. "You belong here," she said firmly, "and we're going to make sure everyone knows it. Tell me everything." She guided Samira through the process. They documented the incidents. They went to Dr. Ramirez together. The new system, the one they had all fought for, worked. The bullies were disciplined swiftly and effectively. Samira was given support. A crisis was averted. It was proof that the culture was shifting. As graduation approached, the acceptance letters piled up. She chose a university in D.C., drawn to its history of activism and its top-tier criminal justice program. She was elected valedictorian, not because she campaigned, but because her classmates simply wrote her name on the ballot. On the graduation stage, under the hot sun, She looked out at the sea of faces. She saw her parents, tears of pride streaming down their faces. She saw Lynn, whooping and cheering. She saw Kyle, nodding with a quiet respect. When I arrived at Northwood, she began, her voice clear and strong. I thought strength meant keeping my head down and avoiding trouble. I learned that real strength is standing up for yourself and for others, even when your voice shakes. She paused, letting the words sink in. Real strength isn't in your fists. It's in your voice, in your refusal to be made small, and in your willingness to stand up for the person next to you. Bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's acting in the presence of fear. It's a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. The applause was thunderous, a wave of genuine warmth and respect. That summer, as she packed for college, Zoe held the small, black notebook where she had first documented Ethan's harassment. It felt like a historical artifact, a relic from a different lifetime. Her phone buzzed on the desk beside her. It was a link from Lynn. The headline read, "Texas teen hailed as hero for defending classmate from bullies." She clicked the link. The article described how a student had stepped in to protect a girl from harassment. When one of the bullies threw a punch, the boy used a familiar-looking wrist lock and leg sweep to neutralize the threat without causing serious injury. In the interview, the boy said, "I saw this video online of this girl, Zoe Clark. She showed me you don't have to be an aggressor to be strong. You just have to be ready." Tears welled in Zoe's eyes. The ripples were still spreading, crashing on shores she would never even see. She smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. She closed the black notebook and placed it carefully in the box labeled college. She was ready for what was next. The girl who had walked into Northwood High, just wanted to be left alone, had become a young woman who understood that sometimes you have to change the world just to find your place in it. And her work was just beginning.